Do you believe man never really landed on the moon?
Do you believe in ghosts?
Do you know that 9/11 was an inside job?
Do you believe in psychics and the interventionary power of prayer?
Do you believe that Ron Paul will actually be president one day?
Do you regularly speak in tongues whilst down on your knees hungrily consuming the flesh of Jesus?
Just because a small group of scientists say that man-made climate change is happening doesn't make it real, does it?
Do you believe that Christianity is the religion of love, Islam is the religion of peace, and Judaism is the religion of milk and honey? If you believe any of those things, or really anything that you've told somebody about just prior to them punching you in the throat, the ImaginaryFriendsShow.com podcast is most definitely not for you. The ImaginaryFriendsShow.com podcast, brought to you by 14.3 billion years of evolution.
Hello, dear listeners, and welcome to this second episode of Eviscerating Stupidity with Science. I am your host, Jake Farr-Wharton, and in this week's episode, we are bringing you something, a conundrum, if you will, that you literally have to see with your ears to believe. Enjoy.
Every time I got a chance, my Bible tape's on in the car.
Well, sorry is not the kind of word that John Howard uses.
When you read the Bible in Luke, you will know that Luke is not from New Jersey. Anything like that right here.
Sorry, I keep saying I have not used the word conspiracy.
With respect to the issue of whether gays and lesbians should be able to get married.
You must understand the Federal Reserve is a cartel made up of the major banks.
It's a very interesting thing, losing one's religion. I think it's a revolution for one.
Actually, I don't even have a car right now. My car got stolen 4 weeks ago.
At the ImaginaryFriendsShow.com podcast, we have received literally some emails asking the question whether we thought the Mayans predicted the end of the world with their magical little calendar, and whether 2012, or to be more specific, December 21, 2012, would in fact be the end of the world that they predicted in great big scary air quotes. Actually, the Maya did not at all predict the end of the world. Like ours, the Mayan calendar expressed the passage of time as a series of cycles. We have a cycle of weeks, 7 days that continuously repeat during the course of a year, and a cycle of months, 12 sets of 28, 30, or 31 days. And they all repeat each year. Of course, nobody worries when Sunday rolls around that the end of time is upon us. Do they? Do you? Do you worry on a Sunday that Monday is simply never going to come? Of course not. Of course not. We all know that after Sunday it becomes Monday again, and then another week begins. And while you may indeed be depressed that it is a Monday, I know I certainly go through that as well, it's not the end of the world, literally, is it? No. And similarly, nobody worries when December 31 comes around on the calendar, and that's while it is the final day of the calendar. We all know that the next day is going to be January 1st, and you're going to be seriously hungover, but again, it is not the end of the world. In an ever-repeating cycle, January 1 has, since the beginning of the Gregorian calendar, all that time ago, whatever it is, 500 odd years, January 1 has always followed December 31 with a pretty terrible hangover, nonetheless. It always follows. The Maya did have the equivalent of months, so each one being 20 days in length, and years made up of 18 of their 20-day months, and an additional 5-day period at the end of the year to add up to 365 days. They had longer cycles as well, the equivalent of our decades, centuries, and millennia, only instead of basing these cycles on multiples of 10, or base 10 as we do, the Maya based their longer cycles on multiples of 20. One of their longer cycles, indeed, ends on the day that translates in our sexy little calendar to December 21, 2012. But so what? The Maya did not, in any inscription found anywhere in their realm, maintain that anything particularly momentous would occur then, least of all the end of time. In fact, they had a rather illustrious god-king who ascended to the throne of king of the Maya in much the same way as the Egyptian pharaoh king or god king Tutankhamun did at quite a young age. But instead of dying quite young as Tutankhamun did, Pakal, which is the name of this kid, or this god king, had a very successful, very illustrious, and very long-spanning reign. So revered was he, in fact, so revered, that in Pakal's, or Pakal, I'm not sure entirely how you'd pronounce it, I'm going to call it Pakal. So as I mentioned, in his burial monument, and I should say that this burial monument is not small. It's not small, okay? It took a lot of people, a lot of years to build this thing. So it is a true testament to the wealth of this man. Not just the fiscal wealth, but also the amount to which he was loved by his people, revered by his people. Nonetheless, in an inscription in the monument of Pakal's tomb is a mention to a celebration date of Pakal's ascension to the throne being the celestial throne, the celestial realm, effectively, which was going to be long after his death. Now, can you guess when that date of Pakal's celebratory ascension was going to be? Can you guess? If you guess that it was going to be December the 21st, 2012, you would be, in fact, incredibly incorrect. No, in fact, Pakal's date of ascension is actually going to be, and you should mark this on the calendar, it is October 15th, 4772 AD. Okay? So, effectively, that is some time ago. So basically, that rather definitively shows that the Maya did indeed think that the world was going to go on well after December the 21st, 2012, because while their calendar did indeed end, or one of the cycles, as I mentioned earlier, did indeed end, they in fact wanted, or at least assumed, that the world would continue on for, at the very least, another 2,000 plus years. Now, perhaps it's just me. Perhaps it is just me. But I don't think so. But I have, in fact, found myself, not plural, just singular. I'm only one, indeed. So I have found myself in I don't know what you'd call them, spiritual circles of late. And, the people that basically say, I'm not religious. Hey, man, don't put me in that barrel with those fish, okay? All right? I don't have anything to do with the Pope. And Jesus, never knew the guy. I've got nothing to say about him. But I'm so spiritual. Those sorts of people. Anyway, I've heard a lot of them say recently that while 2012... and this coincidence of the calendar, the Mayan calendar, ending on December 21st, 2012. While that ends, it doesn't mean the end of the world. This is how these spiritual people interpret it. It doesn't mean the end of the world, right? What it means is it's ushering in the next phase in the universe. So effectively they're saying that there will be great change. So 2012, December 21st, 2012 doesn't mean the end of the world. It just means a great change, a shift in focus, a shift in consciousness. I'm sure you guys have heard of this. It's not uncommon. It's, replete on the internet. It's everywhere. Look, you can pick arbitrary dates for anything and at any time, in whatever type of arbitrary type of calendar you want to base it upon. Harold Camping has done this recently, but he, literally assumed, one would like to think he was, and not just trying to fleece his followers, but he basically literally thought that the end of the world was going to the judgment day that is spoken about in John's Revelation in the very back of the New Testament, in the very back of your Bible, was literally going to happen a couple of times this year. I can't remember the dates. But basically, obviously, that didn't happen. Now, it's not uncommon for people like him, people with influence, people with power, people with a voice and a pulpit, etc., to predict certain things. And it's not uncommon, obviously, considering we're speaking, or I'm speaking, and you're listening right now, that that end of the world would not happen. So it's a fairly new sort of phenomenon, I suppose, for people to say that while the world won't end, it'll be the shift in consciousness. The world will change. Well, you know what? The world changes every week. Okay? Last week, Egypt was relatively stable. Sure, the Coptic Christians were getting a little bit persecuted in the eardrums and the eyes and the stabby and the hearty. But it was relatively stable. This week we see Egypt in turmoil again, trying to overthrow effectively the new dictator, the military, that was basically put there as an interim. Last year we saw the economy on the up and up, and this year it's on the down and down. Change is constantly happening. We're starting to see a shift towards consciousness, in our wastage and the amount of carbon and methane that not so much methane yet, but we certainly should be putting focus on that, on the amount of stuff that we put out into the air that we breathe, depleting the amount of oxygen parts per million and increasing the amount of carbon parts per million, that sort of stuff. So you can pick an arbitrary date and give it an arbitrary meaning, but that doesn't make it real. Okay, and associating it with, this coincidence of December 21st, 2012 doesn't make you intelligent. It doesn't make you right. It just makes you really freaking hilarious. And I sincerely hope that on December 22, 2012, while I am having my party, drinking Mai Tais by my pool. Okay, I don't really drink Mai Tais. I'm just kidding there. Okay, that was a joke. That was a joke. I don't drink Mai Tais. That's disgusting. It sounds Asian. Gross. So while I'm doing that, and the rest of the spiritual world is going, wow, man, I really thought that thing, that change in consciousness was going to happen. And then some, amazing hippie stands up and says, oh, but it has happened. It has happened. And it will permeate through culture slowly. Yeah. Sure it will. Sure it will, pal. Look, change is inevitable. It happens all the time. Okay? Arbitrary dates, arbitrary times, arbitrary meanings. Doesn't make them real. Just makes those people who talk about them really, really gullible. Or stupid. We can't forget about stupid. As Einstein said, there are two things that you can bank on. I'm paraphrasing, of course. There are two things that you can bank on, that you can be completely assured of. The first one is the infinite complexity of the universe. And the second is the infinite stupidity of humanity. He said man, but I'm not so sexist. No. And he also said, and I'm not so sure about the first one. Now, lastly, if anybody comes up to you and says that they know something about the Maya, and the Mayan calendar ending, and it meaning some sort of end of the world, either metaphorical or literal, okay? I want you to tell them this. I want you to say, isn't it interesting? Like, use really high pitch. Isn't it I can't go any higher than that. But isn't it interesting that the Maya, as you say, were apparently able to predict the end of life on this planet, the end of the world, possibly the end of the universe. Yet we're completely unable to predict the demise of their own civilization. Isn't that interesting? And then you do this. You go, snap. And then you look at them in a funny way. And then you direct them to the imaginaryfriendsshow.com podcast. The one true podcast on science, skepticism, religion, and a whole bunch of other stuff that was found in a darkened alley behind a dead homeless person. I've been your host, Jake Farr-Wharton, and it has indeed been a pleasure bringing you this second episode of the newly named series called Eviscerating Stupidity with Science. Eviscerating Stupidity with Science. And I'm sure I'll come up with a theme song eventually. Nonetheless, until we next speak, Godspeed.